Okay, let's start over. Okay, Bev Clark. Ready to go. Not looking so good. Okay.
Are you rolling?
I'm ready. I'm rolling.
Okay. My name is Bev Clark. I'm 66 years old. I'm retired now. I was a climber for the whole of the early part of my life, and subsequently worked in film and television up till now.
All right. And then how did you get here to Lison?
I came here because I met John Harlin in the Penny-Gwyrid Hotel up in North Wales. And at the time I was running a climbing school with Dougal Haston in Scotland. And John had dreams of a much grander, all-inclusive sort of climbing school here in Leysin, where he was going to involve academics with sporting activities and a general outdoor philosophy. And eventually I teamed up with him. I came over to Leysin because of John, and we started the climbing school in 1964. And we based it immediately at the Vagabond Club.
How long did you live here?
I was never a resident of Leysin. I came over for the summers. Just one question: do you want me looking at camera or at you? What's the eye line?
I think this is fine.
Okay.
I like it better than the right into the camera.
Okay. So, you might want to redo those at the beginning, because I was looking into the camera.
Vagabond at the ISM. What's the prehistory?
Okay, prehistory to my arrival in Leysin was meeting John Harlin in North Wales at the Penny-Gwyrid Hotel, which was where all the climbers gathered at the time. And he invited me to come to Leysin and invest basically in the climbing school, because he had dreams of a climbing school which involved academic work as well as an outdoor philosophy and climbing and skiing.
How did you just bumped into him? Is that sort of essentially what?
Look, I honestly can't remember. I think I was introduced to him by Chris Bonington, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
That's okay. What were your first impressions of Harlin, or your impressions, period?
I mean, Harlin was a larger-than-life guy. In fact, the day after we met, we went out bouldering, but on a top rope. And I was from the British school of climbing, where you didn't fall off. And John was from the American one, where you didn't mind falling off. And I was just standing with a shoulder belay on the top of this thing. And John, who was a very big man, just suddenly let go and fell off without warning. And our relationship nearly ended then. It's true. He nearly pulled me straight off the top of the cliff.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
That sounds better to me, Alan.
Yeah, let's hear him. Let's see. Yeah, that does sound good. All right, on with the show. I guess you've already answered some of these questions. Which was how did you decide to start it? The demand location, did it have a niche to fill? I mean, what possessed you to invest in it?
John was a very persuasive guy, and it was a way of justifying my spending my life in the mountains, was to be a guide and an instructor. That's what I wanted to do at the time.
And I guess you were the one who led the very first class, right?
Yes, that's correct. John was not a talented teacher. In fact, he hated teaching altogether, although that was his profession at the time. but he was a dreamer. He came up with the main plans and put teams together to effect them.
You were to be involved with the Eiger Direct.
I was going to be involved in the Eiger Direct, but the timing of it didn't work out at all. In fact, my son was born about 2 weeks before John died.
All right, so let's now segue into the Vagabond Club. And how did you guys connect with the Rankins? How did that all fall together?
Okay, well, John had been living in Les Innes, teaching at the American high school, and he knew Alan and the Vagabond Club way before I got here. So the arrangement to use the Vagabond as a base for the climbing school was established by John.
So, this was really it really the first climbing school in Europe per se? You know, climbing school proper?
No, not at all. There was one in Mering. There was a climbing school in Meringen before the ISM, and Messner also, I believe, had a climbing school.
Let's see. And how did you guys draw for clientele? I mean, what was how did that work? At least with Harlem.
Our original publicity to attract clientele was in the Wall Street Journal. We put a small ad in the Wall Street Journal, and we immediately got a response.
Lots of Americans.
In the early days, it was almost uniquely American clients.
Okay, why do you think that ISM and the bag, the sort of what was it that made it successful? Or was it really successful? Did anybody ever make any money?
I certainly never made any money out of it. I had a good time out of it, but I didn't make any money, and I don't think it made money until the present generation of management took over.
All right.
But I don't regret it.
You don't. All right. So let's talk about the Vagabond Club. What was it like? You know, you hear all these stories, and
The Vag was an amazing place because it really became a stopping over place for all the people who were traveling in Europe. And traveling was a much more popular pre-university or post-university experience than it is nowadays. And so you had people from all around the world, mainly English speaking, but Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans, all meeting there, and it was all very much a young scene. It was a young drinking scene.
lots of drinking.
A lot of drinking.
Okay. Let's see. Fantastic guy.
He's done some crazy things.
Yeah.
He spent the whole of you're rolling, aren't you?
It's okay.
No, Rick. I remember he spent several weeks sleeping in his car because he wasn't talking to his wife. So he slept outside the Vagabond Club in his car for a long while. I can't remember how many.
And that's a pretty famous story because in the Leighton Coors book, Rick writes there's a long piece that he wrote about climbing with Core and how his marriage dissolved within weeks.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, Vagabond Club.
What is the core book?
Beyond the Vertical?
I must get a copy.
It's hard to find.
I've never read it. And what happened to his wife, Joy, who was Dougal's ex-girlfriend?
Yeah.
Joy's a midwife in.
Yeah, she was a nurse. But they tell me a story. You know, it's usually a conversation which sparks a memory, which brings it up. I can't.
What if I were to say a name?
That might work.
Okay, how about Don Willems?
Stop. Hang on, I'll have to think of it. Don't know if he was on the very first. He was certainly in the first year. I've thought of a climbing school story.
Okay.
In the first year, we had a guy called George who came. George wanted to go climbing because he was scared of heights, which was quite a ridiculous reason to want to go climbing. And we were doing a chimney climb in the area. I got to the top and I waited. He didn't come, and he didn't come, and he didn't move, and he didn't move. So in the end, I had to tie the rope off, climb back down to see what had happened to George. And he was manically cleaning his teeth. This was his twitch. When he got very nervous, he would clean his teeth. So we had to make him put his toothbrush away and climb to the top.
Now, somebody told me, or I read somewhere along the line, that the very first course to Chamonix, a student slipped?
Yep, absolutely true. Nearly lost the first student. I can't remember his name. I remember him very well. He stayed around for a long time. It was coming out, we were coming out at the top of the Aiguille du Midi, and normally there's a trail that goes down, and we hadn't put the rope on yet. And the student missed his footing and started sliding straight down the Aiguille du Midi towards Chamonix. And he managed to stop himself, otherwise it would have been a really rather bad start.
I don't think we'd be here right now.
He worked in publishing in New York. I can't remember his name. Tall, thin guy, yeah. Where did you get that story from?
Oh, I've been so in these books
Okay.
for the past 5.
Bona fide, you know, and kind of what that process was like. Was it just a real kind of learn as you go kind of thing, or was there anyone that was, yeah, I mean, I guess this was probably a big wake-up call for you, you know, to have this incident. Hold on.
Yeah, that incident was certainly made me realise, you know, the responsibilities of guiding and taking people into the mountains. And my personal golden rule was never climb anything with a student or a client that I couldn't solo, so that I wasn't dependent on the student. I had one guy coming down the Vallée Blanche after a climb, and there was a really rotten snow bridge over a crevasse. So I jumped over it, and I had him on a rope, and I said, you know, take care to jump clear of the snow bridge. And he jumped straight into the crevasse. He misunderstood me or misheard me and jumped straight into the crevasse. But I was ready for him that time.
With this early days of this school, you didn't have liability insurance, any of this stuff?
We had no insurance at all, none whatever. I don't even know if they do now, or if it's an insurable risk.
Explain a basic. How did you start these courses? You started down the road here, right?
For the beginners course, for people who had never climbed before, we would start in the quarry, teaching how to put a rope on, basic climbing, rock climbing techniques. It's not even a very spectacular quarry, but it was an ideal situation for a first day, and we would teach them abseiling and so forth. We would then progress up to the Tour d'Ailly, which is above Les Uns, where there are 2 and 3 pitch climbs. And we would end off the first week usually at a place called the Argentine, where there's a 15 pitch climb on slabs. Quite easy, but very impressive.
It sounds like they kind of do this. Okay, Julie.
Wait till this family passes.
Well, there was a route on the Miroir of the Argentine where there was a new direct route that had been put up the middle of it, and we did the second descent of that. And the climbing team was pretty impressive. There was Chris Boddington, Yvonne Chenard, Royal Robbins, his wife, myself, Chuck Scott, and I think 7 students. And the guy who did the first descent wasn't very impressed because he was sitting at the bottom watching with binoculars as this circus ran around all over his route.
What year was that?
That must have been 65.
Okay.
That must have been 1965. Yeah. Do you want me to tie that in somehow?
Yeah.
In what must have been 1965, we did the second descent of the Miroir d'Argentine, the direct route up the middle. It's not particularly difficult, but the climbing team was really very impressive with Bonington, Royal Robbins, Yvonne Chenard, Chick Scott, myself, and 7 students.
That was just not uncommon to have that kind of talent in this town.
Oh no, it was outrageous. It was outrageous.
And so this was Harlem that would attract Robbins here, and Chenard, and Leighton Core.
Yeah. You know, Harlan was on it as well, of course. I forgot to mention that.
What's that? Harlem was with you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's just go do it again. It's a good story to give an idea of the talent, and then we'll go into that.
And Alan, I'm not in the frame at all.
No.
Okay.
Okay. In what must have been 9.
Okay.
Once again.
We're going. And Liz Robbins.
I missed her, yeah.
Okay. So, but this is good. I think I can figure out how to segue into something now. So let's just do that one more time, and then we'll talk about the talent.
In what I think must have been 1965, we did the second descent of a direct route on the Miroir of the Argentine. But the talent on the route was quite impressive. There was Chris Boddington, Royal Robbins, Yvonne Chenard, Liz Robbins, Chick Scott, myself, and 7 students.
So, a good time. Okay.
Lausanne is close enough to Chamonix so that during bad weather periods, a lot of the climbers would come over here to have a drink and to meet up with us. And this led to a lot plans and climbs happening in this area.
Did that then, that same sort of, was there, I guess what I'm getting at is, was there a competitive spirit that existed amongst all these guys?
There was, some of the climbers were pretty competitive, and some and would want to climb the lines first, you know, but by and large, there weren't very many secret plans and people trying to get one up on the other.
Okay.
Instead of, you know, after a few jars, you know, you start making plans and yeah, drawing dotted lines on photographs and yeah.
Breeding, just building on the momentum of,
Yeah.
of what other people were doing.
Why don't we, okay, I know I'm going everywhere with this, but it is what it is, because I'm not sure where this film's going to go anyways. That's why we're here. What was a typical night at the Vagabond Club like?
I can't remember. There isn't such a thing.
Yeah, that's a typical night.
Yeah.
That's funny.
No, I mean, it's a bar. People sit around and talk and have a few drinks. And I mean, it was and sometimes it would go on till the morning, but
It was really, it was wild. Tell us a little bit about Dougal Haston, your relationship with him.
Just let me interrupt you a sec there, because I answered this.
We're rolling.
Royal and John Harlan had gone off to do the direct on the west face of the Drew, and they'd taken walkie-talkies with them so that they could communicate with Liz down in the valley. And at one point a block came down and struck John on the thigh, and he thought he'd broken his leg. But they carried on up the climb. But we got an emergency call out, and Lito, Tejada Flores and myself went over to Chamonix the following morning and went up the Drew on the ordinary route to meet them. We met them just below the summit, and we were hit by an enormous storm. It was gigantic. We were all of us getting jolts of lightning off the water running down the rock. And at one point, this walkie-talkie suddenly tuned into a frequency, and we had Louis Armstrong playing The Saints Go in the middle of the storm, and it was absolutely surrealistic. Okay.
Eastwood came and made a movie about the Eiger. You were involved with that.
I was involved with the Eiger sanction because the actors, apart from Eastwood, came to the climbing school to learn how.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay. So Hollywood came.
Yeah, the actors on the Eiger section came over to the climbing school to learn how to climb, get fit, and handle the equipment in a realistic manner. I wasn't, in fact, going to be involved in the making of the film, but one of the climbers was killed on the first day of filming, Dave Knowles, and the other actors said they would only continue if I went over and joined them because they were used to me and they trusted me. So I went over for a few days and wound up staying until the end of filming. There was because of the accident, everyone was very sensitive about rockfall on the face. And I had to go up with one of the other guys every morning on a special train, go out of the tunnel onto the Eiger face and then radio down to say if we could film or not, depending on the conditions on the face. I used to go up with Chick Scott normally, and Chick would be sitting out on the face reading Murder in the Cathedral with his head torch every morning. Later on, the climbers started getting, the production company became unhappy with the fact that we weren't shooting because for a week continuously it was really warm and there were stones coming down in the middle of the night. And then one day we decided that it was good enough to go up, but just with Eastwood and not with any of the other actors. So we had fixed ropes up the face, and Dougal was taking Clint Eastwood up, and I was carrying the Panaflex camera on my back, and I heard a stone coming. I pulled the Panaflex camera over my head to give me some protection, and Dougal looked across at Eastwood and see that Eastwood was looking up to see what was coming, and Dougal just put a hand in his back and smacked him into the rock, and the stone actually opened up his thumb, which was behind his back. So Eastwood nearly took that stone straight in the face.
How was Eastwood? Was he all right?
The trouble with Clint Eastwood is that he has no fear. He's much too brave. I mean, he was doing almost all his own stunting, and it was very, very impressive.
And he treated the climbers well, all you guys?
Yes, he's... You want to give me another lead in there, because you're not going to be able to use it if I just start saying he's...
Yes. Excuse me. You're right. Clint Eastwood.
There's a helicopter.
Okay.
There's a car coming.
It's a flurry of activity here. We're rolling.
Clint Eastwood was extremely brave to the point of foolhardiness. He didn't know when to be frightened and when not to be frightened, which can be quite dangerous in the mountains. But he was a very modest, nice guy who got on very well with all of us. I've got just. I'll tell you the story of that. In fact, when we finished filming it Under the Rotflue, which is
The Rotflue, yeah.
it was my job to get Eastwood down. This is after our first day's filming up there, and I'd go down, clip in, and then I'd come down. I said, "Are you ready?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, fuck off." And he looked at me. I don't think he'd ever been told to fuck off before. It would have been a long time. There was this look of, what have I done wrong? But I can't really tell that story.
Oh, sure, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
No, because, I mean, okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah, let's go. We have nothing to lose. That's funny. All right.
It's a great story to have someone telling Clint Eastwood to
Fuck off. I am now.
I remember at the end of the first day's filming, it was my job to take care of Clint Eastwood's security. And I had him on a top rope. I explained what he had to do, rappel down and clip into the piton. I said, "Okay, are you ready, Clint?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, fuck off." And he looked at me with this really astonished look. I don't think anyone had told him to fuck off for a very long time, but it wasn't meant unkindly.
So, any other sort of big happenings on that film that you can think of during the time? There's got to be some pretty good stories. You all were staying at the.
There was. Yeah. In the Kleiderscheidung.
We were just there.
Okay. On the first floor and on the second floor, there are identical bedrooms. And there was the producer, whose name escapes me for the moment, had the first floor bedroom, and he put a telescope in it to Eiger watch. And on the floor above him was the editor and his wife. And one night, after quite a lot of alcohol being consumed, but mainly by the editor, the producer went to bed to find the editor in his bedroom, in his bed with his wife, arguing about which one of them had bought the telescope. True.
That's good. If I were to watch the Eiger Sanction, are you in it?
I'm the guy in green every time he falls. I stunted I can't remember the actor's name, the Austrian guy, so I was wearing the blonde wig and the green duvet.
No fake rocks, but you had how did you deal with the bodies that would fly off the face?
Well, we had a dummy called Jean-Claude Bidet, and in fact they threw him off the west shoulder and they got the shots going down, and he got hung up on the bottom of the face. And the police got so many phone calls about a body on the face, we had to go in and get the dummy off.
So do you, how did you put the question?
I just said what was the significance of this?
With hindsight, I can see that it was, a pretty high-powered, concentrated group of people. But at the time, it was just what was happening to you. You didn't really think of it as being significant or special. I just now feel privileged to have been a part of it.
And you still very much are in touch with many of these people, are still good friends?
Some of them, yeah, but others, everyone goes their own way and on different continents now, and I'm not in the climbing scene anymore. I've also got two titanium knees. So.
When did you leave
75.
And this was to work in Africa?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about that?
What?
Well, why did you leave and where did you go?
Okay. Are you running?
Yeah, I'm on.
I was getting a bit fed up with climbing because I found the mountains getting much too crowded. And about the last 3 times I went out with clients, I ran into either a dead body or an accident or a serious situation, and I felt this is no longer fun to be in this game. I'd also reached a time and an age where I felt I had to move on and do something else. So in fact we went out to Africa and stayed there for 9 years.
What did you do while you were there?
I was making documentaries initially, film documentaries and commercials.
For whom? I mean, for the...
I was working for the Rhodesian government until independence and making commercials thereafter, as they wouldn't have approved of the documentaries that I made.
What were some of the documentary topics?
It was also a very interesting time because it was there was a war situation, and when you've got a war situation there's always propaganda from both sides, and you think you're telling the truth, but in fact you're part of a propaganda machine. It was basically what happened to me, but I had a great time doing it.
Probably learned a lot.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
Well, we were also making educational documentaries and film about National Symphony Orchestras, and it wasn't just political propaganda. But
And you moved back here in...
we moved back here in 1983, and in 1984 I started working at Swiss Television, where I remained until I retired last year.
Okay, just to begin with, who are you?
My name is Marienette. I'm Swiss born. I've been married to Bev for 32 years. And we met in Les Uns at Club Vagabond a long time ago. I came to the Vagabond with a friend of mine. We used to both work and live in Lausanne. And we heard of this club where there were all these people, these travelers, working in restaurants, working on the ski lifts and the climbing school. And we were very interested because for us it was a way of traveling to meet all these people from other countries. And the first time I came across the climbers, I was very puzzled because I had this image of very fit people sort of drinking apple juice and eating birch muesli for breakfast and being terribly fit. And they were such a rowdy crowd, drinking and smoking at the bar. And it's only afterwards that I understood that when they were climbing, they would do their thing and disappear. And when they'd get back to the bar, they were sort of unwinding from the climb and just letting it go.
How did you, and you worked at the Vagabond Club?
Well, after I met Bev and I moved to London with him, and then I don't remember what happened at the climbing school, but they needed somebody. So we both came back and lived in Les Uns, and because I couldn't just sit there and do nothing, I worked at the reception, and then I was heading the reception and being secretary to Alan Rankin.
What was Ellen like?
Just a second, Ellen. I'm noticing that her cord is across her shirt. Should we?
That's okay.
That's okay?
Yeah,
All right.
fine. That's fine. What kind of guy was Alan?
Alan was a wonderful person. He was full of ideas and enthusiasm. He was like a train engine dragging everybody behind, but he was not a good businessman because he was so full of dreams. They didn't quite match with the reality. But everybody loved him. He was really great.
Not a very good businessman.
No.
Okay. And you worked for the climbing school and for Alan?
Yeah, because I was heading reception, so I was also handling all the correspondence with people who booked, and then allocating the room and greeting them when they came and making sure everything was all right. And I tried my luck in the quarry once with Bev to see what it was like, but no good. And we went a couple of times to Chamonix to do the ice course, but I was just, tagging along.
Let me think.
What's it like to be in the Vagabond Club with all these climbers and?
I was fine because I had a job. So when Bev went climbing, I just switched off to my job and my interest, and I never allowed myself to get scared about whether he would be coming back or not.
Yeah.
Annie or Beth or, any of the other women involved?
I'd rather not.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'd rather not because, no.
So we're with Larry Ware, one of the original guides and students at ISM, and where are we?
Oh, you're asking me where we are?
Yeah.
Well, we're in the quarry. This is the famous Lausanne quarry, and it has an amazing history. Back in the early '60s, prior to the conception of ISM, the International School of Mountaineering, many climbers came here. They all congregated around at that time famous American climber called John Harlan, an extremely charismatic character, very, very powerful character in mind and body. And interestingly enough, to this day I don't know how he did it, but somehow he absolutely drew the cream of European mountaineering to Lausanne, where he lived. He was working at the American High School at the time. And the people that came here later became extremely famous. They were not famous at the time. People like Chris Bonington, Royal Robbins, Leighton Core, Dougal Haston, Mick Burke, Don Willans, Joe Brown, Yvonne Schnard, and the list goes on. There were also quite a few very famous Italian climbers who came here, famous Swiss climbers. Von Hallmann was one of them who died later. Very famous Austrian climbers, German climbers, Konrad Kirsch, extremely famous and very, very competent German climber who actually did the first American ascent of the North Face of the Eiger with John Harlan. Konrad was German. And as I said, to this day, I don't think many people can explain how he was able to draw all these people here, but he did. And they would come here to this quarry. And in the afternoons, mostly on days when the weather wasn't too good, they would compete on these walls and try to climb the hardest, most holdless piece of rock. And Royal Robbins was probably one of the best. Another climber by the name of Bob Bouchard was extremely good. And then there were the absolutely wonderful climber called Stuart Fulton, who a Scottish climber now dead, who climbed the south face of the Foo with John Harlan, Gary Hemming, and Frost. And that was one of the most impressive climbs of his time. And Stuart did most of the free climbing. He was a brilliant free climber. But there's a lot of history here, and in later years, we would, when ISM was moving and when the International School of Mountaineering began, we would bring our students here, and we did so. The first day of climbing for almost any student would be in this quarry. And they would learn all the techniques. They would have their first falls, their first fears. This was the beginning for many climbers. Climbers such as Rick Sylvester, who started his climbing as a student, as I did, at the International School of Mountaineering. I was probably one of the first students, and I think under John Harlan, before John was killed on the Eiger, and I believe Rick started with Dougal Haston in 1968 or 1969. So, and there were many other climbers, both climbers who went on to make names for themselves and climbers who just went on climbing or gave it up. Who knows? We don't hear much from them.
Yeah.
When in the very beginning, and I speak as one of the first students. Actually, I was on the very first course, very first ISM course, with Bev Clark. Actually, Bev was one of the instructors, and he thought I would be hopeless. I always remember that. The course, if I remember correctly, cost $50 for the week. And it lasted 10 days. It wasn't even a week, it was 10 days. Now it's 6 days. And we just sort of, I think John actually wanted to travel around. So he had this bus, and he stuck us in the bus. And we went to Chamonix and did a small climb in Chamonix. And then it was a bit too much snow in Chamonix, so we decided that wasn't too good. So we went down to the Vercors, and we did the Montaiguille and the Vercors, and that was very nice. And then we decided to move. John felt like going for a swim, so we drove on down to the Calanques in the south of France, and almost basically finished out our week, I think, climbing and swimming in on the cliffs over the Mediterranean. It was marvelous for me because, and I suppose for most of the clients, well, only about 3 of us actually, the 3 first students, because it introduced us to all these different parts of France that we could climb in, and I believe I'm just not too sure, but I believe we came back, and possibly the last climb was we did the Miroir. That might have been the first time that ISM, yeah, it was Miroir, and it was probably the first time that ISM climbed the Miroir. The Miroir is a big 400-meter vertical slab over behind Villars, and it's only about an hour and a half from here, and it's not extremely hard, but extremely impressive, and in a beautiful valley, and it became the climb that we did when I was teaching as a teacher, we did it every week. Now, in the very beginning, none of the guides, in inverted commas, were guides. And so the Swiss guides sort of oversaw us. They never participated, they were never there, but they gave us, they had total confidence in us for some reason, and they allowed those of us who guided, for the first, up to about 1980, they allowed us to guide students throughout the Alps, as long as our students were not Swiss nationals, and I think that was the only problem. If they were Swiss nationals, we were not allowed to guide them. Otherwise, we were allowed to guide anybody. And so we took our clients all over the place. We took them up incredibly hard climbs. And I'm amazed that in the history of ISM, I think there were only 2 minor accidents, which is pretty impressive when you consider that most of the people guiding had never guided before. They were just good climbers. Want to stop on that? Put this in there so
Yeah. So let's. So here's the deal. Let's talk about how.
Food?
Yeah. Let's talk about food and equipment and what it.
Oh God, I can show you some gear. I got some gear at the house. I can show you.
We could do it there too, Alan, if he's got stuff to show, because that would be fun.
Sold rubber shoes. So in those days, we climbed in boots, and we climbed in leather boots, and we climbed in a very special leather boot, which was called the Le Phoque Leroux, and the Le Phoque Leroux was a bendy rubber boot. And when Chenard created his crampons, his first those stiff crampons. He created his stiff crampons to fit onto the LaRue boot. Those first crampons were fit because as they were bendy boots, he created this stiff, unbendable crampon so that they could put them on these bendy boots. And they were marvelous because we could climb up slabs with these boots. They were heavy boots, but they bent enough so that we could go up slabs. They were very good for climbing on very small holds. They were brilliant boots. And I think I had a pair at that time. I don't quite remember, but other than that, we had what were called Swami belts, and the Swami belt was a very a nylon band about yay wide and about 2, 3, 4 meters long. 3 meters, about 3 meters long. I exaggerate. And you wind this around yourself. You'd make a knot, and you put a carabiner. You clip a carabiner onto the Swami belt, and you clip your rope into that. And so if you fell, the tension wouldn't be too great on your rib cage, and it might give you about 5 minutes more life if you're hanging. So in the beginning, most of us just put our ropes around I used to put a rope twice around my waist, and then make a bowline. I make a bowline that would fit around the rope, and that would be it. So when you talk about gear, we didn't have harnesses. We literally clipped directly into our ropes. And when you fell, I fell 50 meters once onto a rope, and that didn't do my back any good. And if you're hanging in space, you literally had 10-15 minutes to survive before your rib cage went up through your throat. Things were not that easy. So you learned very early to make a prusik, get a prusik on the rope, and get an étrier onto that prusik, so that you can take the weight off of your around your waist. If you fall over an overhang and you're unconscious, it's pretty hard to get the guy back up, and so invariably I would say the person would probably die. This happened to Longy on the Eiger when he fell. He fell on his rope, and Cordy couldn't get him back up, of course, and he just died. I can talk about it as far as what I know about it. Bev knew more about it because Bev financed it.
Yeah.
Bev Clark financed the. So he is certainly the one to give you the information on at the very beginning. 'Cause I don't know much about that. The other person to talk to, and you really have to talk to, is Carol Rankin. I always remember the first route we did in Chamonix with John. And it was quite a good route. I mean, it's still considered to be quite a good route. And that was a route on the Petit Chalmos. And you climb the west face, the west face of the Petit Chalmos, and then you traverse the ridge, and you get to the top, of course. Then we sort of abseiled down, climbed and rappelled down. Of course, none of us had rappelled before, so that was quite fun. That was quite interesting as well. And then we you get into this gully. Now the gully usually throughout most of the summer is totally dry, but you have to understand that if I remember correctly, they initiated it in May. I believe it was May May or June when they first had their first climbing course, and there was still lots and lots of snow in these gullies, and I always remember we were very slow because none of us really knew much about how to go down snow gullies, and so it was a learning process. And I was with Stuart Fulton, and he was saying, faster, 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 this whole thing's going to avalanche. It's going to avalanche. It's all going to go. It's going to go. And he really meant it. And he was scared. And of course, we didn't realize, we thought, he's having us on. This is just a joke. He's just trying to make it more impressive than it is. And so we sort of kept on plodding down. And by some pure freakish luck, we actually got down before it did avalanche. And actually the whole top of the gully just actually sort of went whoosh, and we were okay. We got out of it just in time. So I think those are some of the initial adventures at ISM, because these guys were not guides, and they were just guys who were making some money so they could climb the rest of the season, and the students were totally ignorant of what was going on. You have to understand, in those days there were no such things as mountain magazines. There were no such things as there were not very many books on the subject, and so people didn't know much about mountaineering. It was just a big novelty to many of the people there, and so I think I think in the very beginning of ISM, as Bev said, there must have been quite a few close calls, and I think they were quite lucky in that way. But for 15 years, the teachers at ISM were not professional guides. They were people who just were climbing in Chamonix or in the Dolomites and needed pocket money, and they would come, and they were very good climbers. They always take the best climbers, and they'd come and teach at ISM, and then they'd go off again. I was no different. I did the same. You know, I'd climb for a couple of weeks, and then I'd go climbing for a week somewhere, and then I'd come back and teach for another couple of weeks, and I'd take off again. Most of us did that.
Now we're rolling.
What was I talking about, actually? I forgot now.
It was the first school of its
Oh, yeah.
international.
That's right, yeah. ISM was the very first international school. There was a Swiss school, I believe, in Grindelwald. There was another one in Zermatt. And then, of course, you had the Chamonix guides. But there was no international climbing school. There was no climbing school run by any foreigner, if you like, American, English, whatever. There was no such thing. Climbing schools didn't exist. You got a guide, and you went off with a guide. There was no such thing as a climbing school per se. And so ISM was certainly the first international and one of the very first climbing schools in Europe. And now you go all over. You find that there are guides who set up their climbing schools in Chamonix and Zermatt and wherever. English guides, American guides, French guides, Italian guides, whatever. And they have their own climbing schools now. So there are a number of climbing schools. You go into a mountain magazine, you open it up, and there's pages of climbing schools, and they'll take you all over the world. But in those days, that was the first one, very first one. And it still remains, I believe to this day, one of the best. Okay?